So I'm Chris Edwards. You can also call me the only thing standing between you all and cocktail hour. So I was 24 when I began my career in advertising. It was 1993, and I took a job as a copywriter at Arnold. And my father, Ed Eskandarian, where is he up there? He was the owner and CEO at the time. And let me tell you, it's not easy being the boss's daughter. Especially when you've always known deep down you were his son. And I first verbalized this when I was around 4 or 5. I came out to my grandmother, and I just didn't realize I was doing it. Neither did she. Surprise! So we were at her summer cottage on the Cape, and my older sister Wendy and I were in the family room with our coloring books, coloring, and Graham was in the kitchen, going from kitchen to dining room with platters of food. And on her last pass by us, she said, "Come on, girls, dinner's ready." And my sister Wendy jumped up and followed her right to the table. And I didn't flinch. I honestly didn't think she was talking to me. And so a minute later, she came back, and she was like, "Didn't you hear me calling you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I said, come on, girls." And I said, "I'm not a girl." And she said, yes, you are." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm a boy." And she said, "No, you're not, sweetheart." And I said, "Well, I'm gonna be." And she said, "No, you can't, darling." And she, looked at me sympathetically and went back into the kitchen. And I remember sitting there, and I was like, "Whatever, Graham. I'm gonna make this happen with or without you." And, as far as I could tell at that age, the only difference between boys and girls was that boys had short hair and girls had long hair. So I just told my mom I want my hair cut like daddy's. Problem solved, right? It wasn't until about a year later that I realized I was lacking certain equipment. I was back at Graham's with Wendy and my cousin Adam this time. We had just come back from the beach, and we were out on the back deck eating popsicles. And Adam says to me, "Watch this." And then he turns to the side and pees in a perfect arc right over the deck rail. And I was like, when I pee, it goes straight down. So I was like, "Oh my God, how did you do that? Do you have a squirt gun in there?" And my sister's like, "Duh, he has a penis." And I'm thinking, what is this penis, and how come I don't have one? But I already felt stupid, so I wasn't about to ask. So I didn't say anything, and in my head I'm like, okay, mine just probably hasn't grown yet. I'm sure it'll grow, and then I'll be fine. But that never happened, and I started to realize that something was terribly, terribly wrong. And every night, I would go to bed and pray that somehow, some way, my body would turn into a boy's body, and everybody would finally realize they were all wrong for thinking that I was a girl. And my body changed all right, just not the way I'd hoped. Puberty hit, and it was the worst betrayal I could have ever had. I knew then that I was stuck with this body that I hated, and as a result, I was stuck being a girl. And as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it for me. I became deeply depressed. My whole personality changed. I wasn't the fun-loving kid I used to be. I was angry all the time. snapping at everybody. My father was the first one to call me out on it, and he pulled me aside after one of my tantrums, and he was like, okay, what is going on with you? You used to be the calm one in the family. You were easygoing. What is wrong? And I couldn't explain it. And even if I could, I was too scared to say anything. And what would be the point anyway? There was nothing I could do about it. So I answered him in the same way any teenager would answer their father or mother. I don't know. In junior high and high school, I knew I was attracted to girls, so I figured I must be gay. And that's actually a very common mistake people make. A lot of people think being transgender is just an extreme form of being gay. It's hard for people to understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are two completely different and unrelated things. One way to understand it is sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew was, oh my God, I think I'm gay, and that was traumatizing enough for me. Remember, this was the early 80s. Nobody was openly gay. Certainly nobody in white upper-class suburbia where I lived. There weren't even any celebrities to point to. George Michael was still in the closet, for God's sake, and those were the Wham years. I mean, he's up on stage bopping around in white capri pants, singing "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go." But he's not gay. The problem was, I looked up the definition of the word gay just to make sure. I mean, that's how I am. I'm very thorough. And it just said somebody who is attracted to the same sex. It didn't say anything about feeling like you were in the wrong body or wanting to become the opposite sex. So I didn't fit in there either, and I'm thinking, great, so I must be a freak, and I will never, ever tell anybody how I feel inside. Specifically not my family. I couldn't humiliate them, and I couldn't bear the thought of them being ashamed of me. So senior year in high school, I made a decision. I decided I would go to college, party it up for 4 years, and then kill myself after graduation. The first part of the plan was very easy. I had already gotten into Colgate, and they were ranked the #1 party school in the US that year. So I majored in psychology and minored in keg stands. But graduation came and went, and I couldn't bring myself to follow through with the rest of my plan. So where did that leave me? Well, when you get to a point where you don't want to live your life anymore, you basically have two choices. You can either end it or you can change it. And I couldn't bring myself to end it, so I knew I had to change it. Now, lucky for me, I had 3 things going for me. The first was a loving and supportive family. And this is something most trans kids do not have. And it's a big reason why the suicide attempt rate is 50%. 50. Now, I'm not saying when I finally told my parents, they were like, well, let's go get you some surgery. They were supportive, but cautiously supportive. It was a lot to take in. There was very little information on this at the time. Certainly no success stories that they could point to and say, oh, okay, well, and surgery was nowhere near where it is today, especially going from female to male. It's a lot harder to add than it is to subtract. So they were scared for me. They were scared that I would go through all of this and end up a social outcast and be worse off than I already was. And I remember after I told them a week or so later, my father had been processing the news. And he said to me, do you think you could just live with it? You know, stay the way you are and just make this your handicap? And I said to him, this is my identity. It is not something that I can compartmentalize and put on the shelf. It's who I am every day. And if I have to live my life as a girl, I would rather not live it at all. Sorry. And he hugged me. And he said, we will figure this out together as a family, and we will get through it. And it was that feeling of not being alone in this anymore that gave me hope and the courage to take the next step. Which brings me to the second thing I had going for me. How many people here have been in therapy? I never think anyone's going to raise their hand, so that's great. So forget the next joke I had planned. But finding the right therapist was critical to me getting through my transition as successfully as I did. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a worrier. It's ingrained in my DNA. I worry about everything. To give you an idea, in high school, I was voted most likely to get an ulcer. It's true. So when it came to changing my gender in front of everybody I knew, I was consumed with worry. Worry about what are people going to think or say or do. It was paralyzing. And what my therapist got me to realize was that I had some control. She got me to realize that the way I acted could actually shape the way others reacted. And when she said that, it was like something clicked. It was like unlocking the secret inner power I didn't know that I had. And it was that power that ended up saving my life, which is why I hold my therapist in such high regard. That didn't mean I didn't want to kill her at times, especially in the very beginning. I remember my first session going in there, and we just sat there staring at each other. And finally I was like, so where should we start? Where do you want to start? I don't know. Wherever you think is best. Where do you think is best? You know, it's like you go to a therapist because you want answers, you want a professional to tell you what to do, and she was all about the questions. Constantly challenging my feelings and assumptions, and as annoying as it was actually a very good thing. My plan all along was that I would move away and go somewhere where I didn't know anyone and transition. And she got me to realize that I was going to need a lot of support to get through this. And to go somewhere where I had no family and no friends and try to do all this in secret, you know, while appealing, you know, in the short run could actually be a lot more stressful in the long run. And it was her who got me to be open to the idea of transitioning, staying in Boston and transitioning at Arnold. Which brings me to the third thing I had going for me. I worked in advertising. So I was able to take the branding and marketing principles I'd been applying to my client's business and use them to rebrand myself. Now, before I even go there, there's another thing you should know about my personality. I am not type A. I am type A plus. Maybe even A plus plus. I know it's rare for a creative director, but it's true, and it's why account people and clients all loved working with me. I'm a strategizer, and I'm a planner, and I plan out everything. So when it came to something as important as my transition, you can bet your ass I planned the shit out of that thing. All right, so what did I do? Well, the first thing we do in all rebranding situations is take a look at the competitive landscape. See what's going on. Let me paint the picture. 1995. The word transgender didn't even exist yet. The word was transsexual, and it had a very negative connotation. It still does. And the only points of reference that people had were movies, like Silence of the Lambs, where the villain, Buffalo Bill, was a frustrated transsexual who skinned women so that he could make a female bodysuit for himself. Nice. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. I was laughing all along until the end. Spoiler alert. The villain is a mentally unstable transsexual. And then, of course, there were the stellar guests on Jerry Springer, as seen in this episode entitled Tranny-licious. So when it came to changing perceptions, I had my work cut out for me. Not only did I have to rebrand myself, I had to rebrand an entire category. So what was my brand message going to be? It was simple. I needed to convey that having gender dysphoria did not make me a whack job like the media portrays. To show people that I'm normal, that I'm still the same person on the inside, just a little bit different on the outside. My brand personality. Well, considering that I was the first person to ever change genders at the agency and in the community, I knew I had to set an example. So I decided right away I was not going to be meek or ashamed or secretive about my transition. Instead, I was going to be an educator. I was going to be open and honest, willing to answer questions, volunteer information. I'm an oversharer to begin with, so this was really just an extension of my personality. The other thing I did was I used my sense of humor to put people at ease around me and let them know I'm not sensitive about it, and it's an open topic for conversation. And the first time I did this, it was like an involuntary reaction. I just couldn't help myself. I was walking down the hall toward the AV department, and the head of AV was explaining to her intern what a female-to-male adapter cord was. And I just happened to be outside her, passing by her open doorway as she held it up and said, "This is a female-to-male." So I just stuck my head and I said, "Hey, stop talking about me." Got a lot of laughs. Thankfully here too. The next thing I had to figure out. The good news was there was no internet yet. You couldn't Google anything because there was no Google. So what was formerly a disadvantage to me as I struggled to learn about being transgender was now an advantage in that I had complete control over the information flow. I would only share what I wanted people to know, and I would tell the story my way. But how was I going to get the word out? I knew the best thing would be for it to come from me personally. Nobody can tell my story like me. And because of my father's position in the company, I decided the right thing to do would be to tell the executive board. That was fun. So I wanted them to hear it first, get, the respect. I didn't want gossip to trickle up, so I'm going to tell them first. Well, what about the other 500 people at the agency? Then what happens? I didn't want the board sending out a memo, and I was not about to call an agency meeting to announce it. So what was I going to do? Well, this is where my background in advertising really came in handy. I had just learned about evangelism marketing. And for those of you who don't know, evangelism marketing is basically encouraging people to take a leadership role in spreading the word on your behalf. You'd probably call it word of mouth now, right? Word of mouth. It's cooler. Doesn't sound religious. But back then it was evangelism marketing. And so at Arnold, the goal was, with our advertising, was to turn consumers into brand evangelists for our clients. And it hit me, why not turn my coworkers into brand evangelists for me? So that's what I did. One by one, I came out to my 12 closest agency friends, and I told them my story in great detail. I coached them on how to share my story with other people, had them practice on me, which was a very good idea. And then I told them when the executive board meeting was, and that once it was over, just go forth and spread the word. Just start talking. So the meeting was on a Monday from 4 to 5. By 11 a.m. the next day, the whole agency knew, and the whole local advertising community knew. I see some of you look nonplussed. Just keep in mind, there was no Twitter and no Facebook. So that was pretty damn fast for 1995. So give me some credit. So how'd it go over? Well, that morning after the board meeting, I decided, all right, I got to get into work really early. 8:45. It's early for a creative. I wanted to just slip into my office unnoticed, and I knew there'd be nobody on the floor before 9. So I sat in there, and by about 20 past 9, the first person was at my door, giving me a hug and telling me how brave he thought I was. Then the next person to come by was the head of print production. And she just came to my door and said, hi. And I said, hi. And she said, when you know, just let me know how you want me to do your new business cards. Account directors came by on pieces of business I worked on and offered me their support and wanted to know how should we start letting the clients know, how did I want to handle it. It was hugs and well wishes all day. I don't have time to give you all of the stories, but there were plenty. One of my buddies, I'll tell you this, one of my buddies made me a bar mitzvah card. I still have it. It said, congratulations, today you are a man. And because he's crafty and worked in the studio, he mocked up the inside and put all these guy tips in there that he thought I should know. The main one being always look straight ahead at the urinal. I don't mean to imply, I don't want to imply that that day, everybody came up to me and acknowledged it. That's not the case. Most people just treated me like they normally would. And that's all I wanted anyway. So that was great. And there were some negative reactions. I'd be naive to think that there wouldn't be. But none of them were to my face, which was great. And I think having a father as the CEO helped in that regard. But honestly, looking back, I wouldn't have done anything differently, and that day just could not have gone better. Okay. It's like the worst part of the strategy when you read one. This was day one. I hadn't even started to transition yet. That was just the announcement. So I think there's a big misconception out there about transitioning, and people think the person decides they're going to transition. They make the decision, and then boom, they show up to work in a wig and a dress, and there it is. But the fact is, everybody chooses to transition in their own way. Everybody's different in the way that they handle it. This is Kristen Beck. She's a retired Navy SEAL. Was in the SEALs 20 years. She came out probably 2 years ago or a year and a half ago on LinkedIn. She just changed her picture, changed her name, came out, and then the next day she showed up at her job at the Pentagon in a wig and a dress. Bruce Jenner, he just started transitioning without any explanation for years. And the speculation went on and on until just this last April with the big Diane Sawyer interview, and then finally in June coming out as Caitlyn on the cover of Vanity Fair. So for different reasons, the gossip was off the charts on these two methods. And the way I chose to handle my transition was totally different. I wanted to minimize the gossip. That was my goal. So the way I chose to physically transition was very, very gradually. I made the announcement, and I did nothing for like 2 weeks. Let it spread, let people get used to it. And then I started transitioning very gradually with my haircut was the first thing. And, I always had short hair, but it was a gender-neutral, kind of nondescript haircut. I could have just gone and gotten a buzz cut. It was the summer. I did want one. But I knew if I did that, I would come into work and people would be like, whoa, did you see Chris got a crew cut? Be talking about that. So I cut my hair shorter and shorter in stages. The same with growing a beard. I'm Armenian. I was on testosterone. There was hair growing everywhere. I could have grown a beard very easily. But I didn't, because then it would be like, did you see Chris is growing a beard? So I just didn't want to make any drastic changes that would have people talking. The creative department dress code was basically whatever you want, and I was already wearing jeans and button-downs, and so that changed. Aside from when I had a meeting, I'd wear a sport coat, and aside from that, was very, very minor. So all in, by year 2, people were saying to me, I have no idea what you used to look like. Don't even remember. It's kind of like when someone loses 20 pounds in a year and you haven't seen them and you just see them and you're like, holy shit. But if you're with them for that year and they're losing 2 pounds a month, you don't notice. So that was, that worked quite nicely. Then there was the surgical aspect of the transition. All right. The general rule of thumb is you should never, ever Ask somebody who's transgender if they've had surgery or plan to have surgery. It's none of your business, but more importantly, it's offensive. And a lot of people say, you've probably heard, it's offensive, don't ask that. No one explains why it's offensive. And the reason, I'll explain it. The reason it's offensive, did I say expensive? It's expensive too. The reason it's offensive is because by asking that question, you are implying to that person that you don't think they're the gender they feel they are, unless they have the surgery. It's not legit unless they have the surgery. And believe it or not, many, many trans people do not have any surgery at all, for a number of reasons. Everybody's personal reasons. You know, you never know what's going on inside a person's head. It could be financial, it could be fear, it could be no support, it could be a number of things. I knew I wanted surgery right from the get-go. It was the only way I was going to feel complete as a man. And I was very open about everything else about my transition. So there was a 5-year period while I was at Arnold where I underwent 22 procedures. That's 1 every 3 months. I did the math for you. You're welcome. 1 every 3 months. So to me, you know, and I was managing the second largest account at the agency. So I was going to be out a lot. You know, I didn't want it to be awkward. I didn't care if people knew. And frankly, as a manager, it was the smart decision to let people know, okay, then they would know when I could be reached, when I couldn't be reached, when to leave me alone, and not feel awkward about it. So it was actually less stressful for me and for everybody else involved. I know, 22. The deluxe model doesn't come easy. Just tell you that right. It does not. So I had one long-term goal when I started my journey, and that was not to let my transition define me. I just wanted to get through it and be the man I always knew myself to be. It took time. All rebranding campaigns do, the successful ones. But I achieved that goal. I am not my parents' transgender son. I'm their son. My friends don't introduce me as my trans friend Chris, just Chris. And at Arnold, I wasn't Chris Edwards, the transgender creative director. You know, I was just a creative director, an EVP group creative director. I want to sell myself short. So for me, and this might sound odd to hear, I don't consider myself transgender anymore. That was my history. That part of my life has been in the background for a long time, until I decided to write my memoir. Now I'm back in the spotlight. It's called Balls. It is currently with publishers. I'm hoping to hear some news before the holidays, fingers crossed. I've been told if I was a celebrity, it would increase my odds of getting a book deal. So if anyone here can make me famous in the next few months, please come find me after this. Otherwise, you can go to chrisedwardsballs.com and sign up for an email alert when the book is available. But enough on that. A lot of women have asked me, did my being a man help me be more successful in my career? And the answer is yes, but not for the reasons you might think. As a man, I was finally comfortable in my own skin, and that made me more confident. So in meetings, I was more outspoken. I wasn't shy about stating my opinions or defending my work. I wasn't apologetic. I was more direct. I didn't drop hints. I just said what I meant and what I hoped would happen. When I presented creative, I was brighter, funnier, more engaging. Not because I was a man, because I was happy. People told me I looked taller. Some of them were like, is it the testosterone making you taller? I'm like, no, I asked that, and they said it wouldn't. Some accused me of wearing lifts. But you know what it was? When I was a woman, I hated having boobs. And I had a hunch because it would make them less pronounced. So I had a hunch. Now as a man, more confident, walking around, standing up straight. I grew 3/4 of an inch. May not seem like much, but at my height, every little bit counts. So the point is, all this inner confidence projected outward, and it helped the agency and clients view me as more of a leader. Plus, I worked my ass off. You know, I wanted people to focus on my creative ability and not my gender change. And actually, being transgender did give me a bit of an edge on that front. I remember being in internal creative meetings where spots that were supposed to target a general audience were killed because they sounded too much like guy spots, which makes sense. It's not surprising when most of the creatives are guys. But the ideas I was presenting weren't guy spots or girl spots, really. They contained insights that usually applied to both audiences, and my work was getting sold. And then when it came to assignments that targeted women, it was a little easier for me than my male counterparts because, well, been there, done that. Right? So it was these things that were helping me succeed. And despite that, though, there was still the perception, there was still a perception that I was getting special treatment because of my new gender. And I first noticed it. It was about a year and a half into my transition, and a coveted window office became available. After it was picked clean, and the good desk chair was replaced with a junker, and the couch mysteriously disappeared, you know, everyone wanted to know, all right, who's getting it? Who's getting that office? And there was a female art director who had been there a little longer than me, maybe a few months. And when she found out that I was getting it instead of her, she went around and said, oh, well, of course, now he's a guy, so he gets the window office. Of course that's how it would go. What she didn't know was that because of all the hard work I was doing, and I had just helped win a new business pitch, I had been promoted to senior by a female creative director, I will say. So I couldn't be accused of that. It was a creative director who promoted me was a woman. And that was the reason I was being promoted and given this office. But I understood why she went there. The creative department is a boys' club, simply because of the sheer numbers, as we all know. It wasn't really until I was in the club, looking out, that I realized the disparity and how uncomfortable it could be for women because of the numbers. The first time I realized it, I was out in LA. We had just finished shooting. It was my first big production wrap dinner, Chai Venice. And there was one woman sitting at the table, and she was the most conservative account person you ever met. And she is stuck with 7 guys, all well on our way to getting shit-faced, including me. And the producer announces he chose this restaurant specifically because all the waitresses had big tits. And I cringed, and I looked at her, and she was like, whatever. And they don't even notice. And then the director starts talking about there's this great strip club I got to take you all to after dinner. And he starts going on and on about his best lap dances. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking, and I'm like, okay, it's not intentional, but they just get, there are more men at the table, and they get involved, and they go on, and they don't even notice she's sitting there. Needless to say, she did not join us on the trip to the strip club, which was a horrifying experience in and of itself. I could do a whole talk on that alone. But the takeaway was this. For this dynamic to change, and this mentality and behavior to change, more women need to enter and stay in this business. I firmly believe if the number of women and men at that table was an equal ratio, 4-4 instead of 7-1, that conversation, tits and strip clubs, never would have happened. Never would have happened. That said, there was an advantage that I picked up being in the boys' club, and I learned the secret to getting the plum assignments, the raises, and the promotions. Do you want to know what it is? It's really simple. You ready? Ask. Ask. If a guy wants an assignment, he asked. He wants a promotion, asked, raise, asked. It's all around me now because I'm in the thick of it. And I'm like, what? I had never felt empowered to do that. Maybe partially because I was a woman, partially because my father ran the company and I didn't want it to look like I was taking advantage. But at that point, I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I work just as hard, if not harder, than these guys, and if I feel I deserve something, I'm going to ask for it. And I didn't get everything I asked for, but at least I knew I wasn't holding myself back. And it empowered me to go to the next level and take control of my career. I never had a mentor. So, who wants to give the boss's kid a review? Nothing happens. So I took control. I took my reviews and my self-evaluations very seriously. And I would say to my manager, okay, what do I have to do to get to the next level? And I would force answers of steps I needed to take. I would do them. And then at my next review, I'd say, so last year, you said I needed to do X, Y, and Z to be an ACD. Here's what I've done. How about that title? Can I get that title now? And it's very hard for someone to say no to you when you have spit back exactly what they told you needed to do and you've done it. When I started giving reviews, I was stunned at how few people do this. It's your right, and it's your career. So just take control of it and plan it out yourself. If you're not getting the help you need, it's your initiative. Take the initiative and do it. But if I had to leave you with one tip for women, how to move up in the creative department, it would be this. Throughout my career, I probably managed over 50 creative teams. And the one thing I noticed was that women consistently let the guy take the lead when it came to presenting their work. And when I call them out on it, they would say, oh, he's funnier, or he's better at it. And I'd say, well, you better get better at it. Because being perceived as a leader in the creative department isn't just about doing good work, it's about selling good work. And to do that, you have to be a great presenter. I treated every internal creative presentation as practice for the client meeting. And I got good. I got really good. Next thing I know, I'm presenting to the chief creative officer. Then I'm presenting at agency-wide meetings. Then I'm being at all the big client meetings. Then I'm asked to be on new business. That's how you become visible and get recognized outside of your little group that you're in. And other people can then help you and elevate you because they're outside of your group and seeing what's going on. I strongly believe that great presentation skills are what separates the seniors and ACDs from the CDs and GCDs and higher. So that would be my one bit of advice, and I will stop soapboxing on that for now. This is all I really had planned to say. Kat wanted me to leave time for Q&A, so that's where I'll leave it. Thank you. Thank you. Go on. Thank you very much. Who's got questions? You got a mic?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
You mentioned talking about people asking questions that are offensive regarding the surgeries.
Surgery, yep.
Have you ever had any other questions that have offended you?
That's a good question. I am a very tolerant person, so it's going to take a lot to offend me. I actually had an experience recently where if I had written a manual of what not to say to somebody who's transgender, this woman would have checked off every single thing, and I would have had to add an appendix for things I never would have foreseen somebody saying. You want some examples? All right, let me paint the picture. So I'm at this cocktail thing. Okay, it was a singles event. And I was told, this friend of a friend said, you should go. And I was told there'll be like 30, 40 people there. So I show up, and there are 8 women and 3 men. And it was so awkward. But I put my time in, I'm meeting new people, whatever. I'm getting ready to leave, and this woman says to me, Chris, before you go, I heard one of the men here used to be a lady. Which one of those 2 do you think it is? She goes, I think it's David. I go, I don't think it's David. And I was trying to leave, and she kept going, why? Look at his face. He's got such a round face, And I'm standing there, and I'm like, I know it isn't David because it's me. And she's like, what? But you're so handsome. And now, some people get offended by that. I never get offended by people telling me I'm handsome. Some people would because they're like, oh, so now there's this beauty standard you have to hit if you're transgender? But please, I don't care. If you can call me handsome all day long. I don't care. But then she started in, what surgeries have you had? Have you had any surgery? Have you had anything done to your face? No. Well, were you this attractive as a woman as you are now as a man? Or did you have a Pat from Saturday Night Live thing going on? And at that point, I was like, oh my God. But, she had had a few drinks. She was trying, I knew, you can tell when someone's just trying to be complimentary and just shooting off at the mouth and not realizing it. So I put up with it, and then I turned it into a teachable moment. But what I will say to you, she also told me that she asked me if I was on hormones, and I said, yes. And she said, you really shouldn't be. Those are bad for you. I can introduce you to my friend who's into the homeopathic. She'll get you right off those. I said, I think you're missing the point. But anyway, so for me, I'm not really offended. There are things so any of you could say anything and it wouldn't offend me. So feel free. But what hurts, it's more of what hurts me. Not offends me, but what I find that hurts me. The worst thing you could ask me is, what did your name used to be? And that might seem trivial, but for trans people, when you take them back to a place that they just hated themselves and was so traumatic for them, to then bring them back to when they were that other gender is probably the worst thing you could do. So like someone said to me one time, oh, I can't even picture you in a dress and heels. What did you wear to the prom? You know, like things like that are hurtful. I don't find them offensive, but they're hurtful because they hurt me. They take me back to a place where I don't want to think about anymore. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Caitlyn Jenner took a lot of flack when she said, you know, at 65 years old, you know, I'm a woman. And then I read some of the threads on some of the emails, which, as you know, can get pretty vicious. And one of the things a woman said is, you can't possibly say you're a woman because you didn't live all those years before 65. And what you said was, you've always been a man. So.
Yes, but I understand what that woman means, because you haven't lived outwardly, is what she was getting at. And I can see that. I was socialized very differently than guys. You know, most of the guys, I was socialized at Arnold pretty much by guys. I have sisters. You know, most of my friends, my great friends are female just from my previous upbringing. So, you know, one example, I'm at Arnold, and now you guys might relate to this, but if I'm walking down the hall, you know, as a woman, and someone's like, hey, Chris, what's up? What's going on? I'm like, oh, I just got out of this meeting, and I blah, blah, blah. You know, we chit-chat, and then split ways. And as a guy, you know, I'm walking down the hall at Arnold, and these two guys are coming toward me, and they're like, what's up? I'm like, oh, I just got out of this meeting, and I have to write 10 new scripts. And they're down the hall. You know what I mean? They're like, so I was like, well, that's rude. Maybe I just need to be more concise. So then the next time, how's it going? Okay. How's it going with you? They're down the hall. There's no point, and you just go, that's all you do. But so I wouldn't have known that. And, you know, what that woman was probably saying was, you had male privilege your whole life, which she sort of did. So I can see both sides of it. But, you know, someone had asked me, is there anything you miss about being a woman? And I said, well, I really miss having my period. And then I answered seriously, and I said, there is nothing that I miss because I never was a woman. So anything related to that, I don't miss it. Does that help? Okay.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us. It was
I'm
amazing.
honored to be here, truly. Thank you.
So I have two questions. The first one, and they kind of go together. The first one is, being both a female and a male in a creative department, did you ever feel like your gender put you on accounts that were really for those genders? And then the other one is, do people look at you and ask kind of your opinion differently now on certain things? Like, you know, can I get the male perspective on that versus not?
Okay, to answer your first question, the answer is no. I think, you know, I was at Arnold maybe 2 years as female, and I just got put on pretty much the worst accounts. So that's what you do. It was more as a junior person, that's what you got. And honestly, I don't think they really had any that skewed one way or the other. Titleist maybe, but that was really, you just had to be a golfer. And, you know, I did shoot a 76 one day, but that was just on the first 9. So I didn't qualify for that. Your second question, now that I'm talking about this more, I get lots of questions that people want to know, well, what would you think about this, just because I have had both perspectives. And I don't try to speak for everybody. I don't want to speak for everybody. I can only speak for my own personal experience. So I do get requests for interviews and stuff, and a lot of guys want to know, well, what's the insider word on women? What can you tell me? And women want the other thing, want the other flip side of that too. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Hi, I have a question.
Oh, hi.
First of all, thank you. You are an amazing presenter. So
Oh,
that
thank
was
you.
Fabulous. So you brought up an interesting point, and because you have this unique perspective of having been on both sides, when you mentioned the story about the strip club and being at the meeting,
Yes.
so that's probably happened to every one of us in here. It's definitely happened to me. I wondered, after the fact, did any of the men discuss, like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that?
No.
That's not cool. There was no discussion.
Nope.
No one spoke up. No one.
Nope, never noticed. They don't know they're even doing it. They just, when the group gets together, it's just a bunch of guys. And that's why I was saying it's because they outnumber. And you would notice women more if that was a half and half table, and they just kind of, you just get caught up. It's not intentional. I truly believe it's not intentional. It just kind of happens. That's just the dynamic. But yes, there was no, oops, we shouldn't have.
Yeah, so I think that's also another point of it would be great if somehow men were taught to
Yes.
speak up, which is
Yes, you're right.
another point, but
You're right.
because I believe you. Like, I believe it's not intentional. It's kind of not, I think, I wouldn't have believed you if I hadn't heard you say that. Let's say that. Like, in the
Okay.
my impression is, like, they have to know I'm sitting here.
Yeah,
But I believe you, so then that's kind of a whole other discussion of
Yeah,
how
that's
do
a
we
good
teach
point.
men and women, right, that's not cool.
Yeah. I can also tell you that I broke guy code, which I didn't know. But so when I came back from that trip and I told my female friends, so I went to a strip club for the first time. They were like, what? And then they told someone else at Arnold, and then everyone was like, dude, guy code. What happens on the road stays on the road. You don't talk about going to the strip club. I'm like, well, we shouldn't have gone there in the first place. It was disgusting. And they didn't serve any alcohol. You took me to the airport, strip by the airport, to this dump that didn't serve any alcohol, and it was disgusting. You shouldn't have gone. Anyway. Why am I talking about that? Are you recording that? Probably strike that part.
Hello? Yeah, hi.
Hi.
It's an incredible thing to have someone share such a personal story. Why? What made you write the book? Why are you standing here?
That's a good question. I started writing the book 3 years ago is when I decided to do it. And it was a very difficult decision for me. I felt, there's a couple reasons. First, I'm one of those people that you can laugh at it, but I believe things happen for a reason. And throughout this whole thing, I always wondered, why did God make me this way? I'm a good person. I'm nice to people. I treat people well. I'm not a jerk. I would not wish being transgender on my worst enemy. It sucks. It's a nightmare. And why? And then I started to think about it, and my parents, I have a supportive family. They were financially able to help me have the surgeries that I needed. And then I'm a writer. So I had everything. If it was going to happen to anybody, I had all the tools I needed to succeed. And then the writer part, I was like, maybe I'm meant to share my story and write about it so that it can help other people. So that was one. The other thing that was going on at the time was Michelle Koselik. For most of you are not from Massachusetts, but in Massachusetts, this was a prisoner who was male to female, and it blew up on the news, and they were showing pictures of her, and it was not flattering. But again, this is the horrible image, and that they portray transgender people as, and the whole thing was the big thing. Now the taxpayers have to pay for her gender reassignment, and she's a murderer, and this whole thing, and it was terrible. And so again, I was like, God, could they just show people who are normal? And you'd never know in a million years if you walked past. And then the other reason was this ridiculous suicide attempt rate of 50%. And I just strongly believe that if there were more success stories about everyday people, not celebrities, because most people cannot relate to a celebrity. Your life will never be like a celebrity. If you're a parent and your child comes out to you as transgender and you don't have anyone to point to that's been a success, you're probably not going to support your kid. And then the kid's going to try to kill themselves. But if there were more people like me who were successful in their everyday life and are normal and, you'd never know in a million years, then I think that would help not only change perception, but help parents be more supportive of their kids, and their kids stop trying to take their own lives. Zero. Good? If you have any other questions, I'll be boozing it up back there. Just feel free. All right.